did a lot of simulation and calculation for mitigation for methane emission and NTO emission reduction, and also crop growth for adaptation, and also the benefit of the crop yield and production. But we lack a lot of tools supporting for the economic frame and biochem. So we are very fragmented for economic analysis. Recently, we have one small grant by UNEP for the ERI. They calculate the CBA for rice production in Vietnam, but it's not finished yet, and it's going to be handled and training for end user next month. But we need more tool similar like that for the whole Vietnam, for the whole agriculture sectors. We also don't have a very good model for simulate for quantitative animal greenhouse gas. Yeah, and for the region specific, because mostly most model we simulate for pilot scale or farmer field scale. So we don't have a good integrative model for the regional scale. So that's one is we have a lot of differences, or there is many different in from we have 8 different agroecological zones with different climate conditions, soil conditions, and then so we have a lot of difference from that one. And if we use single model, maybe not very precise.
Maybe I'll just add to this. Trin in his presentation laid out about 8 different MACB applications, and we were able to go through those and realize that several of them were very closely tied to models that are not currently the strength of AgMIP, such as coffee, aquaculture, and the greenhouse gas emissions of animals in a livestock system. But we were particularly interested in some of the water use efficiencies that relate also to methane emissions. And the use of residue, and that those are largely national studies, but that we could get started potentially in the An province and work with partners in the emerging AgMIP Vietnam group, and that we could probably use combinations of like DSAT and DNDC to simulate those things, but that would be very exciting if we could connect that into a TOA type model, because that is the big weakness right now, is having that economic counterbalance to the biophysical. But that there are some already in progress and good measurements of greenhouse gas emissions from rice systems in those areas, and therefore it would be a great pilot demonstration to expand for the whole country. And then I suggested that it might even be a great place to have a GRA AgMIP joint workshop, because we could use that also as a launch board for the AgMIP Vietnam and potential AgMIP Southeast Asia work. So I think, yeah, that's about where things ended up.
Great, thanks for that that report back. And there's a lot to talk about on that front as well too. I think just in the interest of time, let's move through the report backs, and then we can kind of wrap up in a discussion and comments, unless there are any burning questions right now. Okay, hearing none, I think why don't we do, we'll just go down the list. So Latin America next, then Africa, and then we'll come back to South Asia. So Kelly, Roberto, do you guys have a rapporteur, or is it you, Kelly?
Me. So we had a small group, but a good discussion, and we talked a little bit first about what kinds of systems we might prioritize, and there we mentioned grassland grazing, livestock systems. We also talked about the importance of perhaps modeling in mixed systems, you know, be able to show intercropping rotations and these dynamics between forestry, crop, and livestock. We also talked about the importance of rice systems for the region, and there's been a lot of work on different water management systems. And so there we also mentioned the possibility of doing the integrated evaluation of SRI, not only to benefit Latin America, but also perhaps Southeast Asia, well, India and Vietnam that we've been talking about. So, and there's some ongoing work with SRI, other projects in the region that we could potentially build off of. We also talked a lot about the importance of better measuring and modeling soil carbon for different countries, and a lot of interest on the political level about using that to achieve both adaptation and mitigation goals in the region. And we also mentioned a couple other projects that could be built off of. There's a climate science for service partnership. Embrapa has a bunch of things going on and a bunch of data that could potentially be capitalized upon. And specifically regarding the Caribbean, we talked about how obviously adaptation there is the entry point. And there's going to be a regional readiness project that I mentioned the other day that has some work on looking at how to improve national greenhouse gas inventories for the agricultural sector in the region, and also is going to do some initial work using TOA-MD that we could potentially build on. So, and a couple of institutions that are interested in helping, obviously GRA, ICA, and we also talked about the Met Office from the UK.
Great. Thanks so much. Anyone have any questions? Well, actually, yeah, we'll save on the questions. Any details, anything else that anyone on the team wanted to add? Okay, I think Kelly covered it. So why don't we go ahead and move to Africa now? Sabine, I don't know if you've assigned a rapporteur.
Yeah, she found me. So
way to go.
Anyway, but I encourage anyone from the team to jump on and add. You know, it was a little bit quiet at first, partly because there's, you know, I think a recognition of a lack of equipment and expertise, you know, to do some of the work that would be required for mitigation. And also because some of the, you know, the dialogue is focused on interventions that are helpful in the present to near future for, and that's the focus for a lot of, you know, the farmers in particular. It's you know, not an easy conversation to talk with smallholders about mitigation. So, you know, we also talked a little bit about how that dialogue needs perhaps to focus on benefits to, you know, soil enhancements and things like that that include, you know, tangible benefits in the near future as well as the longer term future. As far as what kind of projects might be supported in the region, the group felt that, you know, beneficial to be in places where there are known agroecologies and farming systems. So for example, in West Africa, it might be good to have one, you know, sort of study site in a semi-arid zone and then another study site in a subhumid zone, so that you can have sites with, you know, characteristics and then basically representative work areas and then calibration to other similar work areas. And then in terms of crops for in Ghana, it was suggested that, you know, regions that are not mixed crop systems are probably easier places to start. So maybe things that are, you know, either solid rice or grazing lands in the north would be better than mixed systems or mixed crop forest sort of systems and things like that. We did hear that CIRAD, together with CIMMIT and the University of Zimbabwe, has some funding from the EU for agriculture intensification. And it's a really interesting sounding project with opportunities to take up some of the topics that have been raised. And so Zimbabwe might be a location that some of the work could be, you know, focused initially, just owing to ongoing projects that could incorporate some of these facets in the research discussion and dialogue that's going on. One thing I really like about the CIRAD example is that they're taking some of the learning to revise the curricula for universities in Zimbabwe. And I think that's a really important contribution that I'd like to see more of in some of the research areas. It's something that we would also have liked to do, but getting funding, yeah, anyway, we have more to learn from the Europeans about getting funding. Let's see, in terms of potential collaborating partners, in addition to the ones that I mentioned, it was felt that involving the private sector and the government is critically important. The private sector is often in the role of providing inputs, and even if the inputs change to something like biochar, that would probably still involve a private sector partner. So, it has to be a multidimensional sort of discussion. Moving on to the role of organizations, in addition to GRA, we were curious what is the thinking as CGIAR is merging to be one CGIAR. It seems to be, a major reorganization, and a lot of people on the sidelines watching, but not much, has been disclosed publicly, and perhaps it's not appropriate for us to even ask, but it would be really great if we could perhaps even in these formative stages put some influence on or advocate for the incorporation of this topic in the agenda setting for CG. So maybe it's an opportunity to actually put a little pressure, because there's a lot of potential given the presence in the Global South and the number of projects that are available to enhance or shape in that way. And there, maybe, yeah, anyway, so enough on that. And then in terms of the regional modeling framework and assessment contributing to policy development, really, the feeling was continued discussion with farmers and the government probably requires some long-term, and I think CIRAD has some long-term experiments ongoing to calibrate models, and they'll also have some, farm experiments to test models in real conditions. Important to have on station and on farm testing both. Yeah, I mean, that's about as far as we got in the time available. And I think there's, a lot of, it'll be a big lift to really get this topic, going, but we can probably make some progress looking at adjustments to some underway work, just as a way to get started. Sabine or Pamela or Levin or Samuel, Dillis, Ward, anyone who wants to jump in, please do. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I think you covered it.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much to the Africa group. And I think we've got South Asia with us now. So Geeta, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Sonali. And I thank all the participants for their valuable inputs. And we have been talking a lot about kind of what we can take up. And, we have been talking like crops, livestock, foragers, all those things could be an inclusive one. We have been talking about the scale of the project, and should it be a regional scale or should it be a farm scale? And for the policy makers, it is definitely regional scale, because there will be more audience for our regional assessment. And then, but for the accuracy of the results, for some pilot studies on the farm scale is also needed. And it should be a simultaneous approach, both the farm level as well as at the regional level, to guide the policy makers. We also discussed about the stakeholder engagement, especially we have to have a very strong stakeholder engagement, and we have to engage our policymakers as well, like we did it in the AgMIP 1 and 2. So strong stakeholder engagement is also very much needed. And maybe the key focus, like we wanted to have agricultural system defining agroecology, and the scale we focus on is like some hotspots we wanted to take for developing the policy decisions. So one of the hotspots we have been talking was the Kaveri Basin, which is the rice bowl of southern India. So that the case we have been choosing because of two reasons. One is water scarcity. The other one is it is the rice ecosystem. So we have also been discussing about the models. So the models, we have so many models to deal with the rice as well as for the GHG emission. We have been talking about the infocrop model, which was locally developed, which has the potential to give the greenhouse gas emission kind of things. We can also use DNDZ model as well as DZ model, like what we do kind of uncertainty assessment and to have more precise results. There was one suggestion which came out was we have to develop the coefficients for GHG emission. It should be developed in the local condition itself with some field experiments for all agricultural components. So when we are dealing with the farm holding, it will combine both the agriculture crops and also tree crops and also animals and other activities. So we have to have our own coefficients for GHG emission from different components. So that was one suggestion given. And especially for model calibration and validation, that was the one. So for all the components, including fisheries and cropping system and all. So the database need to be developed. That is one of the primary thing. Coming to the potential collaborating partners, because we have been thinking about the rice system, we thought that some of the state agriculture universities and Indian Council of Agricultural Research for sure, and then maybe IRRI, because we are thinking of rice crop, and besides we can have some of the key partners that we are still to think about. As far as funding is concerned, we have been discussing that GCF could be one of the potential kind of funding, and something like a GRA development fund could also be for some pilot studies. So that could also be one of the things which we could do it. So then okay, so another important thing which came out was for the last question, like people will always, policymakers or what people, they will always give more importance to the adaptive measures, but the co-benefits would be the mitigation kind of thing. And some of the examples are already drip irrigation, then the neem coated urea, all those things have been become the policy for mitigation and adaptation practices. So we have to have evidence-based policy. For that, our regional integration, integrated modeling framework will definitely help. I think this is what we have been discussing. If I missed out anything, Dr. Anthony or any other participant who were in our group can jump in, please.
That was good, Geeta. I think you covered it well. The only one point is that we discussed that we would have a dual approach. We would focus at the farm level and model well at the farm level, but we would also try and start at the kind of policy stakeholder engagement end as well, rather than the other way around, just starting at the farm and trying to move up through the scales. That was the only other point. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that.
Great, wonderful. Well, I think we've now heard from all of the breakout groups and what seemed to be very fruitful discussions. Are there questions or key points related to any of what the groups specifically presented? Okay, not seeing any at the moment. I'm wondering, Cynthia, and Roberto, if now might not be, I think we lost Jean-Francois, unfortunately, if now might not be a good time to perhaps move into a more general discussion then and sort of final thoughts, particularly in how we manage to collect information to meet our goals.
I think that's perfect. So why don't you two give some your final thoughts, and then maybe I'll just do a bit of a final wrap up and then want to share the slide about continuation in June, but we'll be doing more, and then thoughts of next steps vis-a-vis GRA in particular. But yeah, why don't you two go first and say what did we learn, and where are we going?
Well, there was a lot here, and Roberto, so I'm just actually showing the slide again, taking a little bit of inspiration from Cynthia, the way that you typically tend to wrap up workshops, kind of revisiting the objectives, right? Right, so we had some particular outcomes from the workshop, but you'll see on the bottom of this slide here. So the first was working towards a MACB framework and draft protocols. And the second was plans for regional pilot projects. And so one of the things that I'm coming away with, there was so much here that I don't think I want to touch too much on details because a lot of that has been discussed. But one thing that became very clear was that there has been a lot of thought, as which is not unexpected, about some potential regional pilot projects already. And in several of the regions, it seems that there are projects already underway at different stages of development, however, right? So the rice work that's been of interest in Latin America that Kelly has discussed, and similarly across both Southeast and South Asia. And then the emphasis on sort of the diversity of cropping systems and engagement with stakeholders in Africa that was being discussed. And so those are actually kind of approaching these regional projects from slightly different spaces, so either from the biophysical or from more of the farmer-oriented approach, or maybe from the stakeholders. And really we need to kind of join across all of those things, because one thing that I mentioned in the South India group, which I think is true just generally, is that I think we all know this, right? One of the biggest challenges with mitigation and adaptation is harmonizing across the scales needed to accomplish both. And I think this was something that became very evident in the regional discussions, is that it's something that we need, but it's not quite clear exactly how to do that or who might be interested in funding that work just yet. But I think what these breakouts have really done is sort of identified where those hurdles are. So that might be something good that we can take from this and start to iron out, you know, within drafting these regional project ideas. And then if we move towards the framework and draft protocols, I think there's definitely elements, particularly for those groups that have already executed RIAs. So in Africa and South Asia, for example, there are elements of the existing regional integrated assessment protocol that we have that are really adaptable for these circumstances, for looking at both mitigation and adaptation. And we'd have to think about how do we deploy those across the Latin American context and Southeast Asian context, which are things that I know that AgMIP has been thinking about for a very long, for years now. So I think that there's still some development to that end that might be the focus of conversations in the next few weeks and months coming out of this, is really working towards that framework and draft protocols. But on that note, I might hand it over to Roberto, who I think has just been thinking about this even more deeply. So Roberto, if you have a few things to say about that, yeah, please do.
Yeah, thank you, Sonali. Well, first of all, I was really impressed with all the amount of information that we've been able to hear in this short amount of time. I only can imagine what we could do with a 2 or 3 day workshop. So it's been really, really good. Yeah, so we've seen several options for pilot studies, right, for mitigation, adaptation, co-benefits in the different regions, or even across the regions, like this possible collaboration South-South between this system of rice intensification in Latin America and South Asia, for example. We hear a lot about model capabilities, but also modeling challenges, right? The need for some modeling improvement, the challenge about data, challenges about skills. We even had some discussions around policy challenges. And perhaps this is a point that also would be useful for following up discussions is, what is the ultimate goal of this? I know we're trying to set up a pilot study, but our ultimate goal should be trying to inform this decision making, right? So how do we reach to the countries, the governments, for example, those that are working on developing the NDCs or the NAPs? So in the next workshop, probably would be good to start reaching out to them and working with them as in the AgMIP spirit, right? Working with the stakeholders in all this process. So yeah, thank you. It's been really interesting and looking forward to continue collaborating on this.
Wonderful. First, the thank yous. Thank you, Sonali and Roberto, for leading this very, I think, very rich and really exciting and motivating workshop that we're just so pleased that we really, we're able to do it as part of AgMIP8. And thank you to all the presenters and the breakout group leaders and report backers, et cetera, reporter backs, or however you say it. And of course, the participants. So I just want to then link back in my remarks to the partnership with the Global Research Alliance. Hayden needed to leave, pop off, but he said, let's have a phone call soon to follow up. So to follow up about next steps. So what the workshop organizers will be doing is gathering all this wonderful material, working on a workshop report, which is joining it with the concept paper and white paper that went into the workshop planning, and really begin also to, but with the eye to beginning to frame a peer-reviewed journal paper on this topic. Texted with Pete Smith, he's very interested, and hope and there will be authorship potential for folks at the workshop. Also in regard to GRA, Roberto just said about the country level stakeholders. And so definitely when we follow up with Hayden and GRA, it is a country alliance of 64 countries, and more are joining all the time. So for our next workshop, which certainly could be in June, which I'm going to share with you the plans for that, the save the date slide for that very shortly. But what we could do is then, I think it's a great idea to have a stakeholder engagement part of our next workshop, as we're presenting what we're coming to, and then getting the stakeholder input and the interaction. So that's a great idea coming out of this. Just one final thought about linking with GRA. So GRA has 3 research groups. One is paddy rice, one is cropland, and one is livestock. And they join researchers all over the world on those topics. So some of the questions about measuring emissions, for example, that is very much what those techniques and methods and analyses, very much, and modeling, that's, although a little perhaps some modeling, is what GRA does. So there's this real potential of interaction between the two groups. But the 4th group is called as we said in the beginning, is called the Integrative Research Group. And that's supposed to bring all the other 3 groups together. And also it's really the modeling group. And Peter and Jean-François and Pamela, who is on, are leaders of that. And Pamela, if you're still on, we very much want to acknowledge your input into the development of this research. Pamela, Josh from Canada. So just as we're thinking about beginning to have some key potential farming systems in each of the developing country regions, or in each of the regions, thinking around linking to those GRA groups, it would be, I think, and topics, I think could be a very useful way to go to build on the strengths of the partnership. As well as, of course, coming from the AgMIP side, as Sonali said, places where we have regional integrated assessments or have strong ties, for example, through ICA and in Latin America. So those were my thoughts, final thoughts. I think we have we have so much great material now that we will be working together very strongly and very actively to create the workshop report, leading to and communicating with GRA to take the next steps. So with that, I want to just now share my screen and invite you to the potential for the next event. There we go. So first of all, we're not going to wait all the way till June to interact because we will be immediately, and definitely the workshop organizers. We have a group who helped to plan the workshop. We'll be getting with them to create the workshop report in the meantime, and then and get with the relevant GRA folks, including the integrative research group as work, because that's the umbrella that we're under. But want to say that just as a final thought is to please save the dates, June 7th to 11th, 2021, because those are the dates that are now reserved for the next AgMIP8 event. We don't know whether it would be entirely virtual, whether it could be in person, whether it would need to be a hybrid, of course, coronavirus situation pending. But just please put it on your calendars. And we like to use these opportunities of the AgMIP global workshops to then hold these very focused, real workshops, real work sessions, as we had today on these key developing projects and partnerships. So with that, thank you so much. It's wonderful. Thanks for everybody who was able to stay on as we extended the timing. But we will certainly catch everyone up who had to leave as well. So with that, thanks to everybody, and to be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey.
Thanks, all.